Hey guys, tonight we slip into a smoky medieval bake haze, where the scent of burnt crusts and sour yeast curls in the cool air like a warning. You're standing barefoot on straw-strewn stones, one eye still half shut, the other squinting at a crooked loaf someone swears is fresh. The oven's still warm from last night, its soot-caked bricks glowing faintly as an exhausted apprentice slaps more dough onto a warped wooden peel. Welcome to breakfast. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're watching from, and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across the flour-dusted floor, and someone hands you a chunk of brown bread. It's warm, yes, but oddly sticky. The texture is all wrong. Dense, sour, a little wet in the center. That's because it's made with yesterday's dough scraps and a starter older than your village priest. In fact, the baker boasts from his great-grandfather's day, as though ancestral microbes are a selling point. Bread is life here. It's practically a currency. Rent can be paid in loaves. But life in the Middle Ages doesn't taste like a French boulangerie. It tastes more like if Play-Doh had body odor. That sourness isn't trendy fermentation. It's survival. Wild yeast, uneven flour, questionable water. Every slice is a gamble. And your jaw? It's in for a workout. Because that daily bread is baked with grit, literally. Millstones shed stone flakes into the flour. So eating bread also means slowly filing down your molars. Some skeletons from the time show teeth worn flat like river pebbles. Historians still argue whether millers did this on purpose to bulk up weight, or if it was just inevitable with their tech. Either way, it means chewing hurts, and chewing is mandatory. The poorest bread, called horse bread, wasn't even meant for horses. It was packed with beans, weeds, and random ground-up grains, a kind of edible day served to peasants who didn't get options. And yet, here you are, gnawing away because hunger is louder than taste buds. A soft snore comes from the far side of the kitchen. Someone's dozed off near the flour sacks again, probably dreaming of white bread, a luxury only the rich afford. White bread is sifted multiple times, cleaned of the bran, soft and clean-looking. Nobles eat it because their bellies never knew what real hunger meant, and their intestines hadn't learned to fear coarse rye. But for you, it's barley, rye, maybe some oats. And if last year's harvest was bad, you might get bread made with ground peas or lentils, which sounds healthy until you realize they're using them because they ran out of everything else. Now and then, the bread kills people. Not dramatically, no daggers baked into it, but slowly, cruelly. Some loaves carry mold like ergot, a fungus that can cause hallucinations, burning sensations, or death. More on that delicious horror later. But just know, that bite you're chewing might have more in common with a bad acid trip than a balanced breakfast. A rat scurries across the floor. No one flinches. It's basically staff at this point. Even the baker just tosses a crust its way. Someone once thought to add herbs to disguise the taste of spoilage. A pinch of sage or pennyroyal could mask the sourness or funk. But more often, you just eat faster before noticing the flavor shift. You watch as someone carves a symbol into the next round of loaves. Not just for decoration. Bread in towns is marked with a baker's mark, so that when townsfolk complain or get poisoned, officials know who to find. Quality control, medieval style. The bread is pulled from the oven with long paddles, some blackened at the ends. No timers here, just guesswork and superstition. If the loaf sounds hollow when tapped, it's done. Or maybe it's cursed. Depends who you ask. Your crust scrapes your gums like sandpaper, but it's warm. That counts for something. People line up with cloth bags and carved tokens, the medieval version of bakery loyalty points. The richer folks send servants, and the richer still just eat something else entirely. Still, you're lucky. You're in a village with a communal oven. In more rural areas, you'd bake at home, over open hearths, under iron pots, using embers and prayer. More room for disaster. Burned? Start again. Undercooked? Eat anyway. Because food is too precious to waste, even when it might take a few years off your lifespan. And that's if your flour wasn't already compromised. Grain is stored in barns, often next to animals, dirt, insects, and lice. Rats? Yes. Weevils? Definitely. You might not spot them, but they are in there, crawling through your doughy mouthful like unseen stowaways. Don't think about it too long. By the way, ever notice your stomach feels tight after this meal? That's because medieval bread is often unleavened or underleavened. It sits in your gut like a well-meaning brick. The fermentation process is wild, hard to control, and temperature dependent. So, half the time, the dough rises too fast or too slow, or not at all. Oh, and speaking of leavening, there's no commercial yeast. They used balm, the foam skimmed off brewing ale. You're literally eating beer-flavored bread. Or is it bread-flavored beer? Either way, we'll get to the ale soon. A bell rings in the distance. Time to start the day. You wipe your hands on your tunic, brush off the breadcrumbs, though it doesn't help much, and head toward the next meal, whatever that might involve. Spoiler, it's probably soup. Or something soup adjacent. Maybe, if you're lucky. But for now, your teeth are chalky, your mouth tastes like roasted grit, and your belly is full of something vaguely nutritious. Congratulations. You've survived breakfast in the Middle Ages. You step outside into the early chill. The sun's still low and lazy behind a veil of smoke and mist. Your breath fogs in front of you as you cradle your aching jaw, still recovering from that geological bread you just tackled. You're heading toward the stone oven again. Not because you're hungry, but because the village blacksmith forgot his lunch in there and, honestly, it smells vaguely edible. The baker's apprentice opens the heavy door to check the coals. Inside, yesterday's heat still lingers. These aren't just ovens, they're the heart of the town. Heated once, they stay hot for hours, sometimes even into the next day. You watch as someone shoves a flattened puck of dough toward the back wall with a paddle long enough to fight off dragons. Or, more realistically, angry customers. Here's the thing. Medieval ovens don't have temperature gauges. No cute little knobs to twist. The baker has to guess by feel, by scent, by smoke, by the blister on his hand he got last week. So your bread might come out half raw in the middle, or scorched on one side like it was made during a small kitchen apocalypse. Historians still argue whether housewives preferred baking at home for control or feared it for the fire risk. You've seen how a thatched roof handles sparks. It doesn't. Entire villages have gone up because someone let a barley cake burn. Today's dough was made with sourdough starter, bubbling ominously in a wooden bowl like it's plotting something. Starters back then weren't the charming countertop pets they are now. They were volatile and prone to turning on you. And they could bring friends, bacteria, wild yeasts, fungi. Good for digestion if you're lucky. Fatal if you're not. You watch the baker toss a pinch of ground eggshells into the dough. It's not for flavor. It strengthens the crust. Or maybe just your teeth. Again, depends on the day. Now let's talk about how you actually get flour. It's not like someone just hands it to you in a dainty paper sack. First, you walk to the mill. If the river's high enough, the water wheel might even be working today. Inside the mill, the grinding stones thunder like an angry god. You shout over the din as you hand over your grain. And the miller does his job, mostly. And by mostly, we mean he might skim off a bit of flour for himself. Just a handful. Or 3. Millers were famously shady. Jokes from the time warn you not to blink when a miller's near your grain sack. But he's necessary. Without him, you're back to grinding grain with a hand quern, which is basically a medieval gym membership disguised as kitchen prep. The flour you get isn't white. It's beige, maybe grayish, and flecked with bran, chaff, and that ever-present bonus mineral, stone dust. We talk about this in the last section, but here you get to see the source. These massive millstones grind against each other, slowly wearing down not just the wheat but themselves. Every loaf carries a little of the wheel. And here's where the stone oven comes back in. You slap your gritty, rustic dough onto a peel, dust it with more flour so it won't stick, and slide it into the oven. The door slams shut, and you wait. There's no timer, no buzzer, just instinct, and maybe the whimper of someone who burned themselves yesterday. As you sit nearby, you pick up a hardened heel of bread from yesterday's batch. It's been drying out next to the hearth, and now it's basically a spoon. People use stale bread as trenches, thick slabs that double as plates. You pile stew or meat on top, and when it soaks through, you either eat it or toss it to the pigs. Or your dog. Or beggar. Hierarchies are everywhere, even in soggy leftovers. Now, for fun, someone offers you a bit of black bread, so-called not because of rye, but because it's basically burnt. It tastes like regret and charcoal, but it fills the gap. You try a nibble. It's dry, a little smoky, and somehow bitter and bland at once. Still, it's better than eating ashes straight from the hearth, which some people actually did during famines. Ash mixed with flour was a known desperation recipe. Speaking of desperation, there's that time a village in France tried mixing ground ferns into their flour, or birch bark, or even animal bones. Not for flavor, for bulk. Food shortages meant people got creative, and not always in ways that kept their digestive systems intact. Bakers were held to strict standards. Laws controlled the weight and size of bread loaves. Too light? Fines. Too small? Stocks. Some unlucky bakers got publicly shamed or even had bread nailed to their heads. A fashionable yet tragic statement piece. You glance around the bakehouse again. The air's warmer now, filled with that comforting not quite right smell of yeast and smoke. The new batch is ready. The crust crackles as it cools, and the loaf practically hums with residual heat. You break off a corner. Still sour, still chewy, still full of weird little specks you try not to inspect too closely. One baker tells you his oven is blessed. He lights incense on baking day. Another swears by singing to the dough, usually hymns, but once he accidentally sang a drinking song and the whole batch collapsed. Coincidence? Probably. But in this era, magic and superstition are your only recipe books. You hear someone mutter about Saint Honoratus, the patron saint of bakers. His statue sits in the corner, soot-smudged and crumbling, probably judging your posture. You nod respectfully, just in case. At last, with your crusty treasure in hand, you step back into the light. The world's waking up. Chickens cluck from the alley. A dog limps past with what may or may not be a stolen ham. And your bread, gritty, sour, kind of awful, is warm in your hand, and miraculously, still better than starving. You wander away from the bakehouse with your bread bricks still warm in your palm. Try not to let it scratch your gums too much with each bite. The morning air is lifting now, fresher, though not exactly clean, with smoke, livestock, and something suspicious near the tanner's hut. Your stomach's churning already, but not because of the smell. It's thirsty. And here's where the real medieval twist comes in. You head to a nearby alehouse, or someone's kitchen, because honestly, the line between pub and pantry is paper thin in this village, and you're offered a wooden mug of something foamy and flat. Breakfast in liquid form. It's ale. Weak, cloudy, and lukewarm. But safer than water, so you knock it back. Yes, water exists. But are you drinking it? Not if you value your intestines. In most towns, the water supply shares real estate with animal pens, laundry troughs, and open sewers. One upstream latrine can turn a whole village into a stomach flu symphony. Historians still argue whether this water paranoia was fully justified or just cultural habit, but there's no denying people trusted ale more. So ale for breakfast it is. This isn't your local craft brewery's IPA. This is small beer, barely alcoholic, made to hydrate without killing you. Children drink it. Grandmas drink it. You drink it. It's made from fermented grains, boiled, and then steeped with whatever hops or herbs are around. Sometimes nettles. Sometimes yarrow. Occasionally, something that's definitely not hops, but smells convincing enough. It's not carbonated, and it tastes like soggy bread soup, but does the job. Hydrates you, calms your hunger, and maybe gives you the slightest buzz if they got the proportions wrong. You watch a nearby farmhand slam back 3 mugs before plowing a field. This is your medieval Red Bull. A thick layer of sediment floats near the bottom of your cup. Dead yeast and grain particles that settled out after fermentation. You swirl the mug a little and sip again. Gritty, but at least it's friendly grit. Unlike the gravel you chewed at breakfast. Brewing ale at home is common, and everyone swears their recipe is best. There's that widow who adds a touch of rosemary. The cooper's wife who lets her mash sit in the sun for 2 days because the bees know when it's ready. And then there's the monk over the hill who brews with such precision it borders on divine. Or possibly obsessive. You peek behind the curtain of the brewing setup. There's a huge copper pot hanging over a fire. Barley simmers with water in a thick, bubbling mash that smells. Honestly, a bit like oatmeal's rowdy older cousin. Once it cools, they'll pitch yeast, either captured wild from the air or from the same starter they've been using since who knows when. Brew too fast, and it goes sour. Too slow, and it rots. Add the wrong herb, and you're dancing with hallucinations. Add too few, and the ale spoils. No pressure. Ale isn't just refreshment. It's sustenance. It's loaded with calories thanks to all that grain. So a few mugs can carry you until lunch, or dinner, or whenever you find a turnip someone forgot to guard. And here's where it gets funny. Monks, the supposedly sober, serious types, make the best ale. Their brewing techniques are borderline scientific. They obsess over temperatures, times, and cleanliness. Some even add secret ingredients. The monks don't speak of it, but it might be blessed water or it might be honey. Either way, their ale tastes better and makes you feel holier after drinking it, or at least less like vomiting. Of course, not all brewing goes well. You remember your neighbor's disastrous batch last spring. It turned purple, fizzed aggressively, and gave everyone who drank it nightmares about owls, according to one peasant. No one died, but no one drank it again either, except the pigs, who were never quite right after that. Historians still debate whether medieval people were mildly buzzed all the time or just really well adjusted to low alcohol drinks. You guess it's both. You've seen a few folks stumble by mid-morning with that peculiar, "I'm fine, I just tripped on a root" swagger. But not all liquid comfort is ale. There's mead, honey wine, sweet and potent, but only for the well-off. Wine, too, imported or local, diluted with water if you're Roman-minded or just trying to stretch the bottle. The rich drink wine because they can. The poor stick to ale because they must. And now, someone offers you a cup of cider. It's sharp, dry, and a little fizzy. A nice change of pace, though your stomach's wondering if it's been given too many surprises in 1 hour. You thank your host and lean back against a timber post, watching a few kids chase chickens through a muddy lane. The village bell rings out again. Time is loose here, measured in meals, in chores, in church bells, never in minutes. You're not late for anything. You're simply on medieval time. Your mug is empty now, and someone rinses it in a wooden trough half-heartedly. No soap, just a quick swish. You take it back, still damp, and hang it on a nail. And as you walk away, you realize something. You've survived 2 whole meals without major food poisoning. A miracle. But don't get too confident. The next dish? It's soup, or stew, or whatever happens to be simmering in that blackened pot no one's washed in a month. Maybe it's lunch. Maybe it's just perpetual stew. Your belly rumbles, unsure if it's excitement or warning. You follow your nose now, curious and mildly anxious, toward the bubbling cauldron stationed over a soot-darkened hearthstone. A few voices murmur nearby. Someone stirs the pot with a ladle carved from a single knobby branch, and you realize this stew has been cooking for days, possibly weeks, maybe even longer than your stay in this village. They call it perpetual stew, and it's exactly what it sounds like. A communal pot kept hot, ingredients added whenever available, leftovers absorbed into the murky depths. It never fully empties. It's more organism than meal at this point. You step closer and catch a waft of onions, garlic, and something less identifiable. Is that a turnip or an old boot? The stew sloshes with a slow, gelatinous wobble. Someone ladles out a bowl for you, and you notice the layers. A slice of carrot still holds its shape, clinging to dignity. A chunk of meat, possibly rabbit, hopefully not rat, floats by like a lost island. And beneath it all, the unnameable sludge where days of meals have merged into a brownish, bubbling eternity. This is food in the Middle Ages. No fridge, no food-safe plastic, no expiration dates. Just a cauldron over fire, topped up with scraps and hope. If you're lucky, the constant heat kills most of the dangerous bacteria. If not, well, let's just say dinner might come with consequences. The perpetual stew has many names. In France, it might be a pot au feu. In Germany, a Eintopf. Here, it's just supper. And honestly, the smell isn't bad. A little smoky, a little sour, maybe fermented cabbage, maybe someone's sock. Who can say? Historians still argue whether these stews were practical genius or a desperate last resort. Was it intentional preservation, or just no one wanted to do dishes? You sit beside the fire with your bowl, steam curling around your face, and you take a cautious sip. It's warm, savory, complex in the way only mystery ingredients can be. You find a soft bean, a chunk of bread that dissolved in a broth, a suspicious bit of something rubbery. You stop asking questions. This stew tells a story. Yesterday's duck bones are today's flavoring. Last week's cabbage is today's mushy texture. Someone even dropped in dried apples, which surprises you until you taste the faint sweetness among the salt and grease. Every so often, the pot is emptied, scraped down to the metallic crust, and cleaned, probably during Lent or when someone fainted from the fumes. But mostly it keeps going, feeding mouths from one day to the next, evolving like sourdough or kombucha, except no one brags about it on Instagram. Of course, stew ingredients vary wildly. The poor use root vegetables, turnips, onions, maybe some wild garlic if it's spring. The slightly better off toss in barley or bits of pork. And the lucky? They throw in spices. Real spices. A pinch of pepper, or if someone's truly fancy, a shard of cinnamon bark brought by a spice merchant who may or may not be telling the truth about its origin. Today, you chew on something that tastes faintly of sage and regret. But hey, it's hot, it's filling, and you can dunk your crusty bread in it without breaking a tooth. There's a kind of democracy to the stew. Everyone contributes. Someone brings a parsnip. Someone else donates a squirrel. A merchant passing through offers a handful of lentils. And if it's feast day, someone just might toss in a splash of wine. Cheap stuff, the kind that makes you squint. The fire beneath the pot has to be maintained day and night. You watch as an older woman stokes the coals with practiced hands, muttering something under her breath. Is it a recipe or a curse? Honestly, both are possible. You take another spoonful and your teeth catch on a tiny bone. You pretend it's from chicken. You don't want to know otherwise. Some people bring their own bowls, often made from wood, sometimes from horn. You use what's available. There are no matching dinner sets. No utensils beyond knives, fingers, and the occasional shared spoon that no one wants to clean. You eat fast, partly from hunger, partly from fear the taste will change mid-bite. And here's the twist. This stew is better than nothing. In a world of scarcity, where famine lurks just one bad harvest away, a bubbling pot of something warm is a blessing. It's food security, even if it's also a microbiological mystery. In times of plenty, stews might be flavored with fresh herbs, thyme, parsley, even dill. In winter, it's salt and desperation. And don't ask what they do with the offal. If it fits in the pot, it's food. One man across from you loudly claims he once added eel to a stew and swore it made everyone more romantically vigorous. His wife smacks him with a ladle. You quietly move your bowl farther away from his. The pot never rests. Once your bowl is empty, someone tops it up again, this time with a ladle that scrapes up something chewy and gray. You say thank you and smile, but you've already mentally committed to feeding that bit to the dog later. Your stomach is full, and so is your curiosity. You lean back against the stone wall, letting the warmth of the fire wash over you. The stew, weird as it is, has done its job. You're not dying. Yet, behind you, the pot continues to bubble. Like time itself, it refuses to stop. Ever-changing, yet always familiar. A medieval miracle wrapped in gravy. You step away from the hearth, bowl wiped clean with the last crust of bread, and let the sounds of the village wash over you again. Horses clomping, chickens bickering, someone yelling about goats being in the churchyard again. But your mind lingers on that stew. Not just what was in it, but what was hiding under it, spice. Just a flicker, a tingle on your tongue. Maybe a whisper of pepper or something even fancier. And now you're curious. Because in the Middle Ages, spice wasn't just seasoning, it was sorcery. It could mask the flavor of meat a few days past its prime, impress your in-laws, or bankrupt a kingdom. You follow your nose again, this time toward the market square, where a wealthy merchant is opening a trunk filled with what looks like dirt to you, but is worth more than silver. There it is, black pepper. Small, crinkled, unimpressive looking. And yet, a tiny pouch of it might cost as much as a cow. That's because pepper traveled thousands of miles through India, Persia, across the spice routes, dodging pirates and tax collectors, to end up here in a cracked wooden bowl guarded like treasure. You lean in and smell it. It's earthy, sharp, almost smoky. One sniff, and you understand why nobles put it on everything, including food they'd already salted and smoked beyond recognition. Salt preserved, pepper distracted, and if you really wanted to flex at your banquet, you'd bring out saffron, those delicate red threads from crocus flowers, each plucked by hand. A pinch turned your dish golden. A spoonful could ruin your budget. There's even a medieval cookbook that mentions gold leaf on roast pheasant. Because why not eat currency when you can? Historians still argue whether spices were used to mask rotting meat or just to show off wealth. It's probably both. The wealthy weren't eating spoiled food if they could help it, but if they had to, well, clove and cinnamon make everything smell like ambition instead of decomposition. You stop at another stall. Someone's selling powder douse and powder fort, medieval spice blends with names like a wizard's pantry. Powder douse is sweet. Cinnamon, sugar, nutmeg. Powder fort is savory. Pepper, ginger, maybe a little galangal if the trader had connections. And ginger. You watch a trader slice open a root that looks like it should be part of a mandrake, not a dessert. But one sniff and your eyes water. Ginger was used in sauces, pies, even drinks. Mix it with honey and vinegar, and you've got a syrup for digestion. Or a love potion. Or both. In one corner of the market, a woman sells candied fennel seeds. You try one. It's weirdly refreshing, like licorice and perfume had a baby. Another stall offers dragées, sugar-coated spices that double as breath fresheners and digestive aids. They're also suspiciously addictive. Remember that stew? Without spice, it would have tasted like sadness. But throw in a few cloves or some sage, and suddenly you're dining like a baron, even if the meat was questionable when it went into the pot. A lot of these spices came from far away, like months on a boat through monsoons far. The spice trade was global long before anyone drew maps with any accuracy. Medieval Europe had no chill when it came to flavor. Spices were political, luxurious, and sometimes lethal. Take nutmeg, for example. You might sprinkle on a custard today. Back then, it came from the Banda Islands in Indonesia via Arab traders, Venetian middlemen, and local spice mongers. And if you believe medieval health guides, and why wouldn't you? Nutmeg could cure plague, bad breath, melancholy, or heartbreak. There's a fringe theory floating around even now that spice demand helped trigger the age of exploration. Historians still argue about how much credit to give cinnamon for Columbus's entire bad decision era, but it's not far off. People wanted flavor so badly, they crossed oceans for it. Back at the market, a young boy sneezes violently after sniffing some ground pepper. His friends laugh. The vendor just nods solemnly, as if the pepper chose him. You browse some handwritten recipe scrolls for nobles, try not to laugh at the instructions. Boil meat thrice, soak in vinegar, then sprinkle with a powder of ginger, saffron, and cinnamon. You wonder if anyone actually followed the steps or just guessed halfway through and hoped for the best. Probably the latter. Your own kitchen wouldn't have had many spices unless you were in the 1%. The average peasant might use mustard seeds, garlic, or local herbs. Maybe marjoram or wild thyme from the hedgerows. But true imports, pepper, cinnamon, cloves, those were practically medieval Bitcoin. And sugar? Don't even start. Sugar was a spice, not a staple. Imported, precious, and used sparingly, unless you were showing off. Sometimes mixed with ground bone or chalk to stretch it. No one tell the dentists. Someone near you mentions a noble feast where they served fish glazed with sugar and dusted with cinnamon. Sounds awful. Smelled amazing. That was the point. As you leave the market, your senses overloaded with pungent, floral, spicy aromas, you realize, in the Middle Ages, flavor was currency. It was how you kept guests impressed enemies guessing, and your own nose fooled when the meat had gone on a journey. Tonight, when you scrape your bowl clean, it won't be the chicken you remember. It'll be the warm prick of pepper at the back of your throat, or that tiny, fragrant whisper of nutmeg that somehow made boiled turnips feel like a celebration. You're not sure how long it's been since you ate something that was definitely still alive when it hit the pan, but today, you get the chance. You find yourself standing in front of a rickety wooden table, staring down a hunk of meat that's been described, somewhat optimistically, as aged. The smell? Bold. The flies? Aggressively invested. This is where things get interesting. Welcome to medieval meat culture, where fresh is a luxury, and well hung means you left it dangling in a shed until it practically walked off on its own. You watch as a butcher slings a chunk of venison across a hook. It's already been hanging there for several days, maybe even weeks. Why? Because this is how meat was tenderized, by letting it rot just slightly, or maybe a bit more than slightly. The outer layer blackens and stiffens, creating a kind of edible armor. Inside, the flesh softens, the muscle fibers break down, and the meat becomes easier to chew and smellier to survive. Historians still argue whether this aging was deliberate culinary technique or just poor storage passed off as a flex. Either way, nobility loved it. There's even a 14th century English noble who reportedly wouldn't touch beef unless it had ripened until blue-green fuzz appeared. Tasty. You watch the butcher trim away the exterior rot with a knife that's also used to clean fish, whittle kindling, and probably perform dental extractions in a pinch. That's not a joke. Multi-purpose tools are just tools. The trimmed meat gets tossed into a pot with onions, herbs, and, you guessed it, spices. Again, not for flavor alone. Spices were the final defense against whatever microbial drama was unfolding beneath that gravy. But sometimes, nothing could disguise the smell. That's when you'd boil the meat, then fry it, then drown it in sauce, and then pretend you didn't just eat something that once made your cousin sick. And what kind of meat are you eating? Well, it depends on the season, your wealth, and whether or not the Lord is in a good mood. Venison, rabbit, pork, pigeon, those were for the lucky or the noble. Cattle weren't slaughtered often unless they were too old to work, meaning your beef stew might have come from a retired plow puller. Chewy, with notes of exhaustion. Poor folks mostly ate pork. Pigs were cheap, easy to feed, and didn't require pastures. They also ate literally anything, including trash, scraps, and in rare cases, human remains. There's your fun fact. You're welcome. Some meats were preserved through salting, smoking, or drying. You've got slabs of bacon hanging from rafters like greasy curtains. Sausages stuffed with who knows what drying over fireplaces. Salted herring packed in barrels and sold across Europe like unenthusiastic perfume. And let's talk about game. Poaching was illegal for peasants, but irresistible. The forests were royal hunting grounds, and catching a rabbit without permission could get your hand chopped off, or worse. But hunger doesn't ask for papers. So you'd snare a hare, gut it in secret, and toss it into the stew before anyone noticed. Unless they did. In which case, good luck. You remember someone mentioning that hedgehog used to be a delicacy. People would gut them, wrap them in clay, roast them in a fire, then crack the shell and pull the spines off with the hardened mud. The meat? Supposedly sweet. You try not to imagine the crunch. Fringe tidbit time. Some cookbooks include recipes for cockentrice, a Frankenstein dish made by sewing the front half of a pig to the back half of a goose, or vice versa. It's not a joke. It was the medieval version of a showstopper, served at feasts, stuffed, spiced, and roasted until your guests were too confused to complain. And don't forget swan. Or peacock, not for the flavor. Both are reportedly dry and stringy, but because they looked fancy. The skin and feathers were carefully removed, cooked, then redressed over the meat so it looked alive again on the plate. Like a taxidermy dinner. It's food as fashion. Eat that modern plating. You once heard a monk say that meat heats the body and stirs sinful thoughts, which is why monks avoided it. Fish was cleaner, holier, more temperate. But even they had cheat codes, like beaver tail, which they declared fish because it was flat and scaly. Totally reasonable logic. You finally take a bite of the meat stew in front of you. The texture? Surprisingly soft. The flavor? Heavily spiced, with a strong, don't ask questions finish. You find a sliver of bone, a hair, probably not human, and something that might be a berry or maybe just a boiled beetle. Either way, you chew bravely. A child next to you dunks a bit of meat into mustard. Not French's. Mind you, this is a rough paste of ground seeds and vinegar, more like horseradish's angry cousin. It punches your sinuses and makes everything taste twice as sharp. Perfect for distracting from what you're actually eating. People with means kept their meat in ice pits or snow cellars, depending on geography. You've heard stories of Nordic folks storing whole carcasses in frozen earth for months. Down south, they relied more on salting. But even in the best situations, meat was risky business. No thermometers, no refrigeration, just a nose and a prayer. And when meat turned, they got creative. Mince it, spice it, wrap it in pastry, and call it pie. Because nothing says plausible deniability like burying bad meat under buttery crust. As evening shadows stretch long across the dirt road, and the pot is emptied once more, you hand your bowl back and say a polite thanks. You've survived another meal, this time with meat that could have gone either way. Congratulations. But tomorrow, maybe stick with eggs. Or, honestly, bread. You've developed a surprising affection for that gravelly chew. The church bell tolls across the field, and you know what that means? It's Friday. Not payday, not bath day, not market day. No, it's the day when everyone, by order of both heaven and habit, eats fish. The church has declared that meat is off the menu on Fridays, and also Wednesdays, and during Lent, and on feast days of saints, and a whole bunch of other times that seem to appear out of nowhere. Which means fish becomes the culinary star, whether or not it deserves the spotlight. You make your way to the town square, where barrels of salted herring sit stacked like pickled torpedoes. The smell hits you 2 streets before you get there. It's sharp, briny, and not entirely inviting. A fishmonger cracks open a lid and pulls out a limp, silvery herring, coated in salt thick enough to exfoliate your skin. That's lunch. Salted fish is the go-to option. Why? Because it lasts. Properly cured herring could survive months of medieval climate, rats, and being shipped halfway across the continent without refrigeration. It might arrive a little leathery, maybe even fossil adjacent, but it's edible. In theory, you bite in and instantly regret it. It's tough, chewy, and tastes like an entire sea died in your mouth. A passing dog seems jealous, though, so you might be onto something. Fresh fish is a different beast entirely. If you live near a coast, river, or lake, you might get lucky. Pike, perch, eel, and trout were common. If you're really, really lucky, you might get a chunk of fresh cod. But remember, this is the Middle Ages. Fresh doesn't always mean clean. Fish caught in stagnant rivers often carried parasites or worse. No one's testing mercury levels. No one's worried about overfishing. You catch it, you cook it, you eat it, or dry it, or pickle it, or let it ferment and call it delicacy. Historians still argue whether medieval folk genuinely enjoyed the fish-heavy diet or just endured it. Because when half your week is forced pescatarianism and your idea of variety is whether the herring was salted or dried, enthusiasm starts to dwindle. Let's talk about the famous medieval fast day dish, stockfish. Dried cod, so hard you could build a fence out of it. Before you can eat it, you have to beat it with a hammer, soak it in water for a full day, then boil it until it resembles something chewable. Even then, it's still more resilient than a boiled boot. You're handed a piece. It resists your teeth like a grudge. You chew until your jaw clicks and nod politely. It tastes of history, an ocean, and sadness. But not all medieval fish dishes were despair in a barrel. There were recipes for pike and ginger sauce, eels and almond milk, and even spiced trout wrapped in pastry. If you had money and access to a clever cook, fish day could actually be decent. But for most folks, it was just chew and swallow and hope it stays down. And then there's eel. Oh, eel. The medieval world was weirdly obsessed with it. Eels were fatty, filling, and easy to trap in nets or baskets. They were sold in long, slimy ropes, coiled in baskets or slithering in barrels. Nobles loved them. Monks loved them. Even the poorest people got their hands on them from time to time. You try some eel stewed in wine and herbs. Serve in a cracked clay bowl. It's oily, slippery, and surprisingly rich. You feel like you're eating the dream of a snake that wanted to be a soup. One fringe tidbit: royal officials were sometimes paid in eels. No joke. Hundreds of thousands of eels would be delivered as tax or rent each year. Somewhere in the royal records is a ledger that reads like a seafood restaurant's worst nightmare. And don't forget lampreys, those horror show, jawless fish with circular mouths full of teeth. Nobles adored them. King Henry I of England supposedly died from eating a surfeit of lampreys, which is medieval for dude ate too many sea vampires and paid the price. Still, lampreys were boiled, roasted, and turned into pies with spices, sugar, and wine. Yes, sweet fish pies were a thing. You're offered one. You decline. No offense to sea vampires, but you've met your weird food quota today. But what about fish sauce? Ever heard of garum? That ancient Roman condiment made of fermented fish guts? Well, by medieval times, that trend had evolved into liquamen or muri, the kind of proto-soy sauce meat stale ancho vinegar mess made from anchovies and salt. You sniff a crock of it and immediately regret having olfactory glands. Then there are the rules. You didn't think you could just eat fish, did you? Oh no. The church had a whole list of animals you could or couldn't eat on fast days. Beaver tails? Yes. Otters? Debated. Whales? Allowed. Barnacle geese? Long believed to hatch from trees or driftwood, and thus totally acceptable because clearly they weren't real meat. Logic, medieval style. You wander away from the fish stalls, mouth salty, brains spinning from marine trivia. In the distance, someone's cooking something over a fire. It smells not fishy. Is it cheating? Maybe. But hunger is louder than piety. Still, today you played by the rules. You ate your fish. It was hard. It was weird. It was, at times, vaguely threatening. But you're full, and not visibly ill. A win. Just remember, when someone says medieval food was all bread and meat, set them straight. Sometimes it was herring so salty your ancestors felt it. Your stomach's still heavy with salted fish. Your tongue feels like it fought a brine monster. And as you shuffle toward the grain shed, you remember the real medieval horror, bread that bites back. Not in the gritty, jaw-splintering way we talked about before. This time, it's what's inside the grain that haunts you. You reach into a sack of rye flour and it feels soft, a little damp. A musty smell rises, faint and earthy. Maybe it's fine. Maybe it's not. You're not sure. No one ever is. Because this is how ergot starts. Ergot is a fungus that infects rye and other grains. It looks like little black claws growing where kernels should be. It blends right in, especially if you're milling in a hurry or desperate after a bad harvest. And when it ends up in your flour, let's just say things get weird. You walk past a woman stirring a pot of porridge and muttering about her husband's visions. Across the village, a boy twitches in bed, sweating and mumbling about saints with wings. The baker from 2 towns over had to close shop last week after his entire village started hallucinating snakes in their soup. That's ergot poisoning, also known as St. Anthony's fire. Sounds poetic, right? Until you realize it means burning sensations in your limbs, convulsions, hallucinations, and, in worse cases, gangrene so bad your fingers or toes blacken and fall off. Slowly, horribly. Historians still argue whether ergot was behind some medieval cases of mass hysteria, including strange dancing plagues and sudden outbreaks of religious visions. One theory even suggests the Salem witch trials centuries later were sparked by contaminated rye. Is it proven? No. Is it creepy enough to whisper about while baking flatbread? Absolutely. You pick up a loaf of rye and break it open. The crumb is dense, slightly gray. You stay. Are those ergot sclerotia, little black specks? Or just toasted flecks of husk? You pretend not to notice and take a bite anyway. What else are you going to eat? Butter's too expensive, and your turnips are mushy again. Rye is the poor man's wheat. It grows in bad soil, resists cold, and fills bellies fast. That's why it was common in Eastern and Northern Europe, where wheat refused to cooperate. But its resilience comes at a cost. especially when damp conditions or poor storage allow ergot to bloom invisibly within the grain. And it's not just rye. Barley, oats, even spelt can carry the fungus under the right conditions. You'd think someone would have figured it out sooner. But in the Middle Ages, people didn't know ergot existed. They just thought the afflicted were cursed, or blessed, or possessed, or all three. Monasteries sometimes took in the afflicted, offering them comfort, prayer, and wine. St. Anthony's monks became known for healing the burning sickness. No one understood that all they were doing was switching the patient to clean bread. But hey, miracles are miracles. You sit near the flour shed as someone grinds grain using a hand quern. The slow, circular rhythm is hypnotic. Dust rises in little clouds, coating everything, including your eyebrows. The woman grinding hums quietly, eyes on the stone. She doesn't sort the grain first. No one has time. You think about the debate among modern scholars. Was ergot common enough to kill thousands each year? Or was it rare but memorable? Hard to say. Records from the time are vague, and symptoms of poisoning often overlapped with religious ecstasy, epilepsy, or regular starvation. Still, entire regions experienced outbreaks. There's a record from 944 CE where over 40,000 people in France reportedly died from a burning sickness. Were they all victims of ergot? Possibly. Maybe. Probably not all. But enough that the fear lingered like moldy flour in a damp corner. You wander into the bakery again and watch someone mixing dough in a wide trough. She doesn't measure anything. Just a scoop of flour, some water, a handful of old starter, and salt. No one questions the flour's safety. They need food now, not in 3 weeks after a lab test. The dough rises slowly, filled with wild yeast and hope. The smell is yeasty, familiar, maybe safe, maybe not. You try to shake the thought. And then someone tells you a story about a town where a wedding feast ended in disaster. Dozens fell sick. Some raved about angels. Others tried to fly from the rooftops. A few just slipped away, quietly burning from the inside. They blamed demons, or the bride, but no one checked the bread. You look down at your crust again. It's dark, heavy, and maybe a little suspicious. But it's warm, and you're hungry. And besides, everyone else is eating it, too. That's comfort, right? You chew slowly, wondering if your tongue feels a little numb, or if you're just being dramatic. Probably dramatic. You hope. Some wealthier households try to protect themselves by soaking grain before milling, or baking at hotter temperatures. But for the average villager, prevention isn't even a concept. If the harvest is bad, you eat what you have. Even if it makes your fingertips tingle and your dreams turn to fire. Someone next to you hums a church tune, stirring a pot of rye porridge. Makes the mind strong, she says, smiling. Her teeth are dark at the edges, and you notice her hand trembles slightly. You smile back, pretend you didn't see, and take another bite. Your vision is still reassuringly stable. No dancing saints, no whispering shadows in the stew. But you're not celebrating just yet. Because tonight, you're headed to the castle. Not for knighthood, unfortunately, but for dinner and medieval noble feasts. Oh, they are absolutely as excessive, chaotic, and slightly disgusting as you're imagining. The Lord of the Manor is hosting a banquet, and you've somehow scored a seat. Congratulations. You're about to witness the culinary version of a royal circus, complete with juggling dishes, a parade of meats, and, somewhere in between, the polite practice of induced vomiting. You step into the great hall. Tapestries line the stone walls. Flickering torchlight dances across long wooden tables, and someone's playing a lute with more enthusiasm than skill. The smells are overwhelming. Sweet, savory, spicy, slightly sweaty. A giant roast boar stares at you from the center of the high table, apple in mouth, eyes glazed over like it's had enough of this nonsense. The feast begins. Platters are carried in by servants, balancing them like medieval waiters on a mission. There's swan. There's peacock. There's a roast rabbit wearing a tiny edible crown made of pastry and saffron. Everything is coated in gold leaf or sugar or spices, or all three. You take your seat and quickly learn that in noble dining, everything is about status. The food, the plate, The knife at your side, no forks. By the way, those are suspicious foreign things, even where you sit. If you're close to the Lord, you get the best bits. If you're far, you get leftovers or decorative vegetables. You're handed a trencher, a thick slab of stale bread that serves as your plate. It will soak up the sauces, juices, and whatever mystery puddles emerge. At the end of the night, it'll be thrown to the dogs or the poor. You nibble the edge, cautiously. It's firm enough to roof a cottage. Then comes the first course, pigeon pie. Crust baked hard like armor, filled with birds and seasoned with cloves, cinnamon, and pepper. You take a bite. It's sweet, which is confusing, because you're chewing on a tiny bird carcass. Welcome to the medieval sweetmeat obsession. Fringe tidbit, in elite cuisine, the lines between dessert and dinner didn't exist. Meat pies with raisins and honey. Fish cooked in almond milk. Beef with sugar and saffron. If you didn't know whether to eat it or brush it over toast, you were doing it right. Then there's the entertainment. A jester tumbles by with dyed goose feathers sticking from his cap. A servant presents a dish shaped like a castle, complete with battlements made of hardened sugar. Another course arrives. An actual hedgehog, roasted and bristling with almond slivers to mimic spines. Is anyone eating it? Hard to say. The table groans under the weight of food, but no one slows down. Why? Because between courses, nobles excuse themselves discreetly to vomit. That's not an exaggeration. Emetics were sometimes built into the dining routine. You'd step out, purge the first 3 courses, then return for another 5. Historians still argue whether vomiting was a regular custom or just an occasional indulgence, but account from the time make it clear. Gluttony wasn't shameful, it was theatrical. The more you could eat and re-eat, the more impressive you were. You're offered Hippocras now, a spiced wine filtered with sugar and herbs, served warm. It's supposed to aid digestion. It tastes like Christmas and regret. You sip politely. One man next to you smears a sauce made of almond milk and rosewater onto a slice of cold pheasant. Another stabs a quail egg with the tip of his knife and flicks the yolk into his mouth like it's a party trick. Everyone around you is talking, laughing, sweating. A dog barks from under the table, probably full of trencher scraps and peacock bones. The steward announces a new dish, a subtlety. These are edible art pieces, often made from sugar, pastry, or mulled marzipan, designed to wow the crowd. One tonight is a sugar dragon, breathing steam, thanks to a hidden candle. Another is a pie that, when cut open, releases live birds. That one doesn't go well. You duck instinctively. A noblewoman nearby fans herself while chewing on candied ginger. You notice she's eaten barely anything else. That's the trick. Nobles didn't need the calories. They needed the performance, the display, the abundance. You're reminded that this entire feast, every indulgent bite, happens while peasants outside live on broth and beans. This is the top 1%, dripping in grease and gold. Even the bones look expensive. As the night deepens, you start to lose track of courses. There was beef in sauce, then a custard made with marrow, then something involving a porpoise, probably symbolic, hopefully not real. Everything is sweet, spiced, and swimming in a sauce that someone swears is good for your liver. You glance toward the kitchen doors and imagine the chaos on the other side. Spit boys rotating boars, scullery maids scraping grease with knives, someone yelling about the almond paste being too blandly golden. The labor behind this luxury is enormous. The servants will eat last, if at all. Another round of Hippocras. You feel a little dizzy. It might be the wine, or the sugar, or the cumulative effect of 15 different meats fighting for space in your gut. And yet, no one's full. That's the whole point. This isn't about food. It's about power, wealth, and the illusion that life will always be full of pies and pageants. The subtle irony? Half of these guests will wake tomorrow with indigestion, and some will spend the next day sipping vinegar and praying to Saint Erasmus for mercy. The feast finally ends. The torches gutter lower. The swan skeleton is carted away. The marzipan castle is half-eaten. You stand, stomach stretched, senses dulled, and wonder how much of this food will end up feeding the dogs or dumped into a ditch behind the stables. As you make your way out into the cool night, one thought sticks with you. In the Middle Ages, food wasn't just nourishment, it was theater. And if you weren't careful, it would eat you right back. The next morning dawns with a sharp breeze, and you blink yourself awake to the soft rattle of wind through the trees. You're out early, your stomach still sluggish from the sugar meat symphony of last night's feast. And now you're walking through the edge of the forest, basket in hand, hoping to find something edible. Not luxurious, not gilded, not hallucination-inducing, just something that won't kill you. Welcome to foraging. For most medieval people, the line between food and medicine, and between dinner and danger, ran right through the woods. You squint at a leafy green patch and wonder, is that sorrel or foxglove? One will add a bright citrus tang to your soup. The other will stop your heart. You kneel to inspect some mushrooms near a stump, their caps dappled with dew. They're pale, pretty, possibly deadly. There are no handy mushroom identification apps here. No laminated guidebooks. Just what your grandmother taught you and what your neighbor's cousin learned too late. Historians still argue whether most medieval folk were highly skilled foragers or just incredibly lucky. You're leaning towards skilled, judging by the elderly woman 2 steps ahead of you, who snatches a handful of nettles barehanded and smirks as you flinch. Nettles are gold. Actually, you blanch them and throw them in soup, or pound them into a green paste with salt and oil, packed with vitamins and almost free, if you don't mind the burning fingers. You pass by wild garlic, purslane, chickweed. Harmless, nutritious, delicious. You tuck a few into your basket. Then you spot something red and berry-like. It looks like a raspberry. Could be. Or it could be baneberry, which sounds like a Dungeons and Dragons poison for a reason. You leave it alone. Wise choice. Foraging was survival, especially in lean seasons. In spring, you'd gather wild greens. Summer meant berries. Autumn, mushrooms and nuts. Winter, you prayed your preserved stores held out and maybe nibbled dried rose hips for a little vitamin C and a lot of desperation. But wild food wasn't just for the poor. Even nobles hunted for flavor and prestige. Truffles were prized. So were wild herbs and exotic roots. And then there were the royal hunting parties. More about ceremony and politics than protein. You, though, are not on horseback. You're crouching in the mud, poking at something that might be burdock root. Somebody nearby pulls a beetle from under a rock and says it tastes like almonds when roasted. You do not ask how they know this. You quietly move farther into the thicket. One quirky tidbit. There are records of people eating bark. Stripped, boiled, dried, and ground into flour during famines. Birch, pine, elm. It's not tasty, but fills the belly. Sometimes that's enough. You suddenly remember something from the village healer, mugwort, used in stews and potions, in dream pillows, and supposedly to keep away evil spirits. You spot a tall stalk of it now, fuzzy and green-gray. You break off a sprig and sniff. Herbal, slightly bitter, could be calming, could be nonsense. Still, you pocket it. The danger, though, is always there. A monk once wrote of villagers who brewed a tea from the wrong plant and woke up blind. Another tale tells of children who picked sweet grass near the river, Belladonna, it turns out, and fell asleep under a tree permanently. The forest isn't just a pantry. It's a test, and not just of knowledge. There are actual rules. In many places, foraging is tightly controlled. The lord of the manor owns the forest. Pick too much, too often, or on the wrong land, and you're poaching. Yes, even if it's just mushrooms. That nettle soup could cost you a fine, or worse, a few days in the pillory with cabbage thrown at your head. You spot some elderflowers and smile. Safe, fragrant, good for cordials or fritters. But you know better than to touch the leaves or bark. Those are toxic. The line between edible and poisonous is razor thin, and nature doesn't label her offerings. Still, there's beauty here. The sun peeks through the trees. A bird chirps. Your basket slowly fills with things you recognize. You feel connected to something older than cookbooks, older than ovens, older than fear. Back in the village, these wild greens will go into a stew, maybe a salad, if someone has vinegar left. Someone might steep a few herbs into a tisane for a cough or sprinkle dried nettles over porridge for strength. This is medieval wellness. Chaotic, herbal, occasionally hallucinogenic. You pass a man gathering mushrooms with a suspiciously confident grin. He says he's looking for fairy caps. You decide not to ask what he plans to do with them, just in case. As you step onto the road, you smell smoke in the distance, someone baking. Your hands are scratched, your basket full. Your knees muddy, but you're alive. That's what foraging in the Middle Ages comes down to: surviving the gamble. You tuck your finds into a cloth, tie it up, and head home. You've won today's forest lottery. You didn't eat poison. You didn't get arrested. You didn't mistake hemlock for parsley. Your stew will be green, wild, slightly bitter, but it won't kill you. And that's more than most people could guarantee in this era. You're back in a village now, hands still smelling of mugwort and mystery mushrooms, but your curiosity isn't satisfied. You've tasted the forest. You've survived noble excess. And yet, nothing's quite as suspiciously shiny as the promise of sweetness in the Middle Ages. That's right, it's time to visit the pantry. But don't expect cupcakes and candy jars. Here, sweetness is rare, expensive, and, if you're not careful, secretly lethal. You follow a trail of beeswax and honeyed breadcrumbs to the corner of a manor kitchen, where the air hangs heavy with the scent of cooked fruit, spices, and just a whisper of lead. Let's talk sugar. Real sugar, extracted from sugarcane, was one of the most expensive imports of the medieval world. It came in loaf form, cone-shaped, rock-hard, and wrapped in muslin. You had to chisel it apart, and even then, you'd only use it in the tiniest amounts. A sprinkle here, a glaze there. This wasn't your daily teaspoon in tea. Sugar was a flex, a status symbol. The rich put it on meats, in sauces, in drinks, and especially in subtleties. Those artistic, decorative sweets shaped like animals, castles, saints, or ships. You've seen them already at the feast. Beautiful, extravagant, and maybe not entirely food safe. Because not all sweetness was sugar, and not all sugar was safe. That pie cooling on the table, it's coated with a shiny glaze, white and almost glowing. You reach out. A cook smacks your hand. Not for eating, she warns. It's for the Lord's table. You stare. The glaze is made from white lead. Yes, lead. Crushed and mixed with vinegar or honey to make paint for cakes and sweets. It creates that perfect decorative shimmer, like porcelain, but brings along a side order of neurotoxic doom. Historians still argue whether cooks truly understood the danger. Some sources suggest they suspected certain sweeteners were harmful. But beauty trumped caution. After all, what's a little vomiting between courses when your pie looks like a marble statue? Another danger. Mercury was occasionally included in alchemical recipes for preserving fruit. Again, not on purpose to poison anyone, but because it preserved freshness and enhanced brilliance. The people doing it believed mercury had mystical powers. Modern science confirms it had something else, a talent for organ failure. You move over to the honey jars now, relieved. Honey feels safer, familiar, sweet and golden and unreasonably sticky. Unlike sugar, honey was widely available in medieval Europe. Beekeeping was a respected art, and hives were as valuable as cows. Monasteries kept bees for wax and honey, and many medicinal recipes list honey as the first ingredient. Good for coughs, wounds, and mixing with literally anything you couldn't stomach otherwise. You taste a spoonful of thick, raw honey, and it coats your tongue like liquid gold. No lead, no mystery metals, just bees doing what they do best. Finally, a win, but the moment is brief. Someone nearby is preparing a syrup using boiled-down fruit juice and a cloudy, powdered additive from a tin marked sugar of lead. Again, that glowing white finish. It's not in all food, but it's in enough. Especially in preserved fruits, served to guests with delicate palates and iron stomachs, which they'll need. One quirky tidbit. Sugar was so rare that people kept it locked in chests. Literally, sugar chests were real things, with keys and padlocks, because it was worth more than some jewelry. To steal sugar was to steal wealth. And maybe your life expectancy. Candied fruit was another sweet treat for the elite. Apples, pears, quinces boiled in sugar or honey until translucent. They looked like gems. They tasted like money. And they were also prone to mold and spoilage unless preserved with, Yes, you guessed it, toxic compounds. And still, the upper classes gorged on them. Sweetened almonds, candied violets, marzipan molded into knights or dragons. Even sugar sculptures too fragile to eat. Imagine ordering dessert just to look at it and potentially suffer brain damage from the shimmer. You pick up a bite-sized sugar wafer, admire the detail, and place it cautiously on your tongue. It melts slowly, sweet, delicate, then slightly metallic. You spit discreetly into your sleeve. Even when it wasn't poisoned, sugar had consequences. Medieval doctors were already warning about sweet humors and how sugar heated the blood. It was blamed for bad breath, tooth rot, and sluggish bowels. But none of that stopped the craze. Sweet was the flavor of the future, of luxury, of power. And then there was fake sugar, cheaper substitutes made from chalk, gypsum, or powdered bone. These imitations were sold by unscrupulous merchants trying to undercut real sugar's price. Sometimes they were mixed in, sometimes served outright. If you ever wondered why your almond cake tasted like plaster, now you know. Meanwhile, the poor made do with molasses, if they were lucky, dried fruit, or honey-flavored gruel. Real sweetness was rare, which made it magical and dangerous. Even spices got involved. Cinnamon, nutmeg, and ginger weren't just for savory stews. They were used to sweeten. With the right balance, you could make a prune taste like a feast. With the wrong one, you could make someone faint. You leave the kitchen with a dry tongue and a cautious appreciation for your molar enamel. Sweetness, it turns out, was a double-edged dagger, one dipped in gold and filled with glittering peril. That evening, as you sip a cup of watered-down honey wine by the fire, you realize, in the Middle Ages, sweet things were beautiful, rare, and absolutely trying to kill you. The sun is low again, dripping orange over the rooftops as you wander toward the edge of the village where the bell tower and herb gardens rise in quiet silhouettes. You're headed to the monastery now, a place where food, medicine, and mystery have always blended into something stranger and sometimes surprisingly effective. The gate creaks open. You're welcomed with a nod and the smell of herbs, parchment, and old stone. Monks in simple robes shuffle past, their sandals whispering across the worn flagstones. One carries a basket of sage and hyssop. Another holds a jar of thick, dark liquid and mutters something that might be Latin or a very intense shopping list. Monasteries in the Middle Ages weren't just centers of prayer. They were centers of practical survival. And that included food. Behind the walls, monks cultivated vast gardens, brewed their own ale, baked their own bread, and grew medicine disguised as seasoning. You follow a narrow path to the kitchen garden. Neat rows of mint, parsley, thyme, horehound, wormwood, and fennel stretch before you, labeled with wooden markers and prayers carved into stone. A monk crouches in the thyme, humming as he trims stalks into a basket. You ask what it's for. He says syrup for sore bellies or flavoring for fish. In this world, every herb has two jobs: make food taste better and keep death at bay. One fringe tidbit: the Physica of Hildegard von Bingen, a 12th century abbess and polymath, lists everything from nutmeg to fennel as divine gifts for healing mind and body. She even recommended eating spelt for joy and avoiding raw fruit to prevent melancholy. Honestly, medieval diet advice hasn't changed as much as you'd think. Inside the kitchen, someone is stirring a pot of pottage, the monastery's all-purpose soup made with grains, herbs, root vegetables, and maybe a handful of dried beans. It's humble, but nourishing. You're handed a bowl, and the monk whispers, "Add this." He passes you a pinch of dried rosemary and a few crushed mustard seeds. You stir them in. The taste is unexpectedly sharp, earthy, alive. Historians still argue whether monastic food was healthier than village fare or was just better hidden under Latin names. The truth? Monks had more time, more knowledge, and more access to fresh herbs. They ate modestly, yes, but with a sophistication most peasants couldn't afford. And then there's the ale. You follow your nose to the brew house, where massive copper kettles gurgle gently, and the air smells like warm bread and wildflowers. Monastic ale was serious business. Unlike the weak, peasant small beer you've slurped, this stuff is potent, crisp, and brewed with obsessive precision. It's also blessed, literally. A monk with ink-stained fingers hands you a cup. You sip. It's rich, slightly sweet, with a bite of bitter herbs at the end. Better than anything you've had since this trip started. Maybe ever. And it's not just delicious, it's medicinal. That's not just a marketing ploy. Monks believed ale could purify the blood, calm the nerves, and preserve life. Add a few herbs like mugwort, yarrow, or hyssop, and you've got a medieval wellness tonic. Or, depending on the batch, a hangover in a wooden cup. One batch, they say, was infused with mandrake root. Only the brave, or the already celibate, drank that one. You head toward the infirmary kitchen, where things get even stranger. Rows of clay jars line the shelves. Dried rose petals, honey, vinegar, dried lizard skin, don't ask, powdered pearl, and something that might be crushed emerald. The monk here wears a tighter expression, less warmth, and more clinical interest. This, he says, holding up a bottle of dark syrup, is for the plague. You decide not to ask how many times it's worked. He explains that they grind dried figs with vinegar and thyme, cook it with honey, and mix it with wine. For sore throats, they burn sage leaves and inhale the smoke. For insomnia, they steep lavender in goat's milk. For demonic possession, well, that's a separate department. One quirky tale: some monasteries kept crocodile dung as an exotic warming agent. No one knows why. Possibly from confused translations. Possibly because monks were also susceptible to weird trends. You peek into a pantry, and there's a stack of cheese wheels aging patiently on wooden boards. Cheese here is sacred, literally and logistically. Monks perfected cheese-making techniques that would lay the groundwork for future French and Swiss styles. They monitored temperature, humidity, and curds like alchemists. You're offered a slice. It's nutty, firm, and glorious. The kind of bite that makes you understand why monks didn't need feasts. They had cheese. And yet, their eating habits were bound by ritual. Meals were eaten in silence. The portions were small. Meat was restricted, fish more common. Beans, grains, and vegetables ruled the day. But somehow, everything still tasted better here. Maybe because they used care as the secret ingredient. Maybe because they had time. Or maybe it's just the absence of lead-glazed pastries. You leave the kitchen carrying a linen pouch of dried herbs, a monk's gift. He tells you to steep them in hot water if you ever feel foggy of thought or flat of spirit. You nod solemnly, try not to trip on the stone steps. Outside, the bells toll again. Evening prayers. You hear chanting echoing through the hallways as the sun slips below the fields. You turn back once, catching the warm glow of the kitchen window. Inside, someone's pouring more ale. Someone else is peeling garlic. And you think, here, food might not be extravagant, but it matters. It heals. It comforts. It even glows, though thankfully not from powdered minerals. You're back outside the monastery walls now, walking the muddy track that runs alongside the market square, your pouch of monk-approved herbs swinging gently at your hip. The town is louder now. People yelling, carts rattling, dogs barking, and something distinctly meaty sizzling on a grill nearby. It smells good? Maybe. You approach, nose first. The source? A street cook with a soot-blackened apron flipping what might be liver skewers over open coals. His grill is just an iron plate balanced on bricks. His seasoning? Salt, ash, and luck. You're back in the thick of medieval street food. Not everyone cooked at home. In fact, a lot of people didn't. If you lived in a city, London, Paris, Ghent, you often relied on street vendors and cooks to get fed. Not out of laziness, but because fire hazards, fuel shortages, and terrible ventilation made home cooking a gamble. And honestly, it was easier to buy a meat pie from a guy with a cart than build your own fire. Street cooks offered everything from pies to pancakes to fried fish, depending on the day and the weather. One day you might get roasted chestnuts. The next, eel and leek stew served in a crusty bowl that slowly collapsed as you ate. You bite into a mystery hand pie now. Meaty, peppery, with a suspiciously sweet aftertaste. Probably apples. Hopefully not kidneys. But here's the kicker. That pie might have been prepared in the same alley where the barbershop surgeon is currently draining someone's knee fluid. Yes, right next door. In medieval towns, zoning wasn't really a thing. Cooks, tanners, butchers, barbers, and surgeons all worked elbow to elbow in spaces that smelled like boiling fat, singed hair, and warm blood. You walk past a stall and see a barber sharpening his razor next to a cauldron of stew. A cook dumps bones out back, straight into the gutter where wastewater flows. Sanitation? Optional. Germ theory? Non-existent. Rats? Very much included. Historians still argue whether street cooks genuinely tried to maintain hygiene or whether they simply built up stomachs of steel and called it good enough. One fringe detail: barber surgeons often performed minor surgeries and doubled as butchers. That's not an exaggeration. The same skills, sharp knives, steady hands, a strong stomach, served both crafts. You slice a pig, you lance a boil. It's all cutting, really. You pass a tavern that's serving something steaming in wooden bowls. The sign says pottage and porter. Inside, the air is thick with grease, smoke, and drunk laughter. A boy carries a tray of boiled eggs. Another balances two trenchers with something gray and jiggling. You don't ask. You sit and accept whatever the landlord sets in front of you. Turns out it's barley soup with bits of bacon rind floating on top like meaty lily pads. You dig in. It's warm, salty, and relatively inoffensive. You take another bite and crunch down on something hard. Maybe a bone, maybe a nail. You'll never know. There's shouting outside. A rat catcher's chasing a particularly bold rodent down the lane with a stick. It disappears under a cabbage cart. Everyone carries on. Rats are part of the ecosystem here. Unpaid staff in every kitchen. And yet people eat. Daily. They survive. Even thrive. Sometimes. Not every meal is doom in a bowl. Some cooks are genuinely good. Some meals, even humble ones, have flavor and texture and soul. Take the pie baker down the alley. She works from a hole in the wall, rolling dough on a flour board that she dusts with salt and ashes. Her fillings? Pork, onion, maybe a pinch of cloves. You try one. It's warm, greasy, and shockingly satisfying. The crust is chewy but golden. The filling rich with a hint of spice. You nod your approval. She nods back without looking up. Then there's the cook shops, early fast food joints. You can walk in, sit at a bench, order hot food, and eat on the spot, if you can afford it. The fare is limited but fast. Porridge, fish stew, cheese curds, or a bit of stewed fruit. Sometimes served on a trencher, sometimes in a wooden bowl with a spoon chained to the table so no one runs off with it. That actually happened. A lot. You sip a weak ale and watch the town move. Across the street, a tanner's scraping hides. Next door, a baker's boy is swatting flies off loaves that still steam from the oven. A small girl sells apples, shriveled, bruised, but still precious. One curious dish catches your eye. A vendor is selling black pudding, a kind of blood sausage made with oats and pig's blood. It's firm, dense, and smells rich. You try a slice. It tastes like iron, oatmeal, and bacon had an intense conversation. Not bad. Not bad at all. But you know better than to ask how clean the casing was. Here's a medieval truth. Eating in town was always a risk. But so was not eating. And when food was hot, fast, and cheap, people didn't ask too many questions. They just ate. A bell rings nearby. The cook beside you sprinkles ash into the fire, throws on another sausage, and waves you off with a grin. You nod and keep walking, a little fuller and a lot more aware of how thin the line is between food stall and surgery table. In the Middle Ages, the kitchen wasn't a separate, pristine space. It was right there in the chaos, tangled with butchery, healing, and sometimes disaster. You ate what you were handed, said a quick prayer, and hoped it stayed down. So, next time someone tells you medieval food was just bland gruel, remind them it was also street pies, boiling pots, barbers with cleavers, and the occasional surprise nail in your soup. The road curves out of town now, leading you past rows of low timber houses and out toward the edge of something much bigger than stew pots and sausage stands. You're on the fringes of a world-spanning phenomenon, the long, winding arteries of medieval trade. And at the center of those arteries, taste, spice, curiosity, and sometimes plague. You stop at a caravan unloading crates marked with strange symbols. The merchant, wearing too many rings and an exhausted expression, pries open a chest to reveal fragrant treasures. Cinnamon bark, bright orange saffron threads, wrinkled peppercorns, cardamom pods that smell like exotic desserts. This is what flavor costs. A fortune and often a body or two along the way. Medieval trade routes stretched across continents, land and sea, from the spice plantations of India and Sri Lanka to bustling ports in Venice, Genoa, and Alexandria. These routes were long, slow, and perilous. Sandstorms, pirates, double crosses, and oh yes, disease. But at the end of the line, tiny bundles of magic that could transform spoiled meat into gourmet illusion. One bag of cloves could pay a servant's yearly wage. A pinch of saffron might cost more than chicken. And still, people crave them, especially the rich, who use them not only for flavor, but to show off. A well-spiced dish wasn't just tasty. It said, I can afford to eat things from the other side of the world. Historians still argue how much of this trade was about culinary passion versus medicinal superstition, because these spices weren't just food enhancers. They were seen as health tools. Pepper to warm the blood, ginger to cleanse the stomach, cinnamon to balance the humors. Basically, eat enough spice stew and you might live forever. Or die fabulously. You move closer to the merchant's cart and spot something peculiar, dried galangal root. It looks like ginger, but smells sharper, more medicinal. It was a favorite in 14th century kitchens and sometimes brewed into wine for digestive recovery, which you suspect is medieval speak for next morning hangover cure. And then there's sugar again, still not a kitchen staple, but an import. The merchant holds up a cone of sugar like a sacred relic. From Cyprus, he announces, then a smaller one. This one came through Venice. Took 6 months. You're tempted until you see the price, enough to buy a new donkey. Next to the cart, a leather pouch spills open with threads of saffron, dried stigmas of crocus flowers, hand-plucked and sun-dried. It smells like hay and metal and something sweet. You breathe it in, instantly hungrier. Quirky detail, there were saffron smugglers. Real ones. Stealing, adulterating, or counterfeiting saffron was such a serious crime in some cities that you could be executed for it. That's how high the stakes were for seasoning your soup. But the further these goods traveled, the more risks came with them. Silk Road caravans and spice ships didn't just carry cinnamon and pepper. They carried fleas. And with fleas came death. The Black Death, the plague, followed many of the same trade routes that delivered saffron and nutmeg. Rats climbed aboard spice ships, nestled in sacks of pepper, and spread across ports with the same quiet speed as cardamom changing hands. Some believed the spices themselves were causing illness. Others believed they could prevent it. People stuffed pouches with cloves and nutmeg, wore them around their necks to ward off plague-ridden air. Street doctors filled bird-like masks with fragrant herbs, hoping that masking the stench would protect them from infection. A scent barrier against doom. One fringe remedy, boiling cinnamon bark in wine and breathing the steam. To cleanse the lungs, they said. You try not to picture how many people stood over boiling pots of wine, eyes watering, praying their lungs wouldn't betray them. Back at the caravan, the merchant is arguing with a priest about taxes on imported nutmeg. It's a spicy conversation, literally. In some places, the church taxed spice imports heavily. In others, nobles claimed exclusive rights. Spices could start feuds, even wars, yet they kept coming. Down the road, you see a smaller stall offering local spices, sage, thyme, marjoram, wild mustard. Less exciting, perhaps, but safer, fresher, and honestly, less likely to bankrupt your family. Local herbs kept regular food palatable and didn't come with smallpox as a side dish. Still, the exotic stuff held magic. You hear a tale from a wandering minstrel about a duke who dreamed of a pepper castle. Every wall, spire, and doorknob made of spice. He died broke, but allegedly fragrant. You step inside a nearby tavern and order something modest. Mulled wine, spiced with whatever the cook could afford. It arrives warm, tart, and laced with a whisper of cloves. You sip slowly. It tastes like safety wrapped in scandal. You think about how every spice grain in your cup passed through multiple hands: traders, pirates, cooks, and smugglers. Every dish in a noble court had roots in jungles and coasts you'll never see. And every spoonful was a gamble, not just in money, but in mortality. That's the medieval food story in a nutshell. Global, dangerous, extravagant, and weirdly intimate. You step back into the street, warmth in your chest, and saffron threads still dancing behind your eyes. The caravan is packing up. The merchant gives you a nod. A breeze stirs the air, carrying scents from every corner of the known world, and just maybe one or two you wish you didn't recognize. You wake the next morning to a strange silence. The usual sounds, the blacksmith's rhythmic hammering, the rooster who always forgets his late, the gossiping that seeps through shutters like smoke, aren't there. You step outside, barefoot on cold stone, and sense it. Something has shifted. The air feels still, heavy, not with weather, but with waiting. Whispers flutter like wind through the alleys. A merchant hasn't opened his store. A child fell ill in the night. The baker's apprentice hasn't returned from the river. Nothing dramatic, yet, but the dread creeps in sideways, quiet and certain. The last thing you ate was a soft, speckled pear. It seemed fine. A little bruised, maybe. Now you're wondering if it left a strange taste, or if that's just your tongue playing tricks. There's talk of sickness coming from the next town, then from the port, then from every direction. They are calling it the Great Mortality. You don't know yet that it'll be called the Black Death in years to come. All you know is that people are vanishing, and food doesn't taste the same anymore. Not because it's changed, but because you have. You walk toward the market, and what's left of it? The herb seller is packing up. She says she's heading to the woods, away from the crowds. She offers you a sprig of rue. To ward it off, she says. You nod. Whether it's protection or placebo, it can't hurt. But what is hurting now, silently and invisibly, is the supply chain. Ships are docked, but no one wants to unload them. Sailors lie fevered in their bunks. Spices sit untouched. Bread goes stale. Fish rot in barrels because no one dares touch them. Food is still here, but the trust is gone. People say not to eat figures, or soft cheese, or anything that smells sweet, or sour, or like death. So, everything. Historians still argue about what people thought caused the plague. Miasma, divine punishment, bad food, too much heat in the body. Some said garlic kept it away. Others drank vinegar, or bathed in urine, or burned sulfur in their kitchens. You see a man boiling rosemary and waving the steam toward his chickens. No one laughs. No one blinks. In the manor, the Lord's cook has shut the doors. No more feasts. No more pies. Food is now measured not by taste, but by risk. The noble family eats behind drawn curtains. Their meat served cold, their fruit scrubbed until the skin comes off. In the village square, someone has started painting a red cross on doors. You see one, then two, then five. The tavern is half empty. The ale tastes flat. The soup is thinner than usual, stretched too far to feed too many. You eat slowly, listening to the hush between each cough. One man in the corner pours ground cloves into his wine until it's thick with spice. He says he hasn't tasted anything in days. Another woman eats nothing but leeks and says she hasn't had a fever since. You remember the monastery, the herbs, the comfort of hot pottage and measured care. But even the monks are sealing the gate now. You hear they are treating the sick in silence, heads bowed, food passed through small openings in the wall. No one talks about eating swan anymore, or carcantris. No one's roasting peacocks or painting pies. Food has become function again. A way to live, a way to try. The marketplace shrinks by the hour. What was once filled with shouting and spice is now quiet, emptied of joy, but not quite of hope. Some still cook, some still shay. One woman hands you a slice of barley loaf. It's dry, bland, safe. You eat it slowly, eyes on the horizon, watching clouds that don't quite move. Because in the Middle Ages, the biggest threat wasn't just bad bread or spoiled meat or a suspicious stew. It was the silence that came after. The absence of laughter over a bowl of soup. The stillness of a bakery where ovens have gone cold. The way food loses its magic when you're too afraid to swallow. You chew, swallow, breathe. The flavor, faintly smoky, but alive. And that's all you need right now. So now, with your belly full of barley and memory, let your mind drift gently back through everything we've tasted together. From bread that could sharpen your teeth to ale brewed like liquid bread, to meat that aged on a hook until it fought back, to pies filled with both flavor and mystery. From fish so salted it could haunt your dreams to the golden shimmer of sugar that was both beauty and danger. You've wandered through forest groves where dinner hid behind a wrong guess, and through noble halls where feasts doubled as theater and emetics. You've crouched near the fire at the monastery, soot on your fingertips, comfort in your cup, and stood silent in markets where saffron and sorrow traveled side by side. And now, here in this stillness, you rest. Not because the food is perfect, not because the fear is gone, but because even in the strangest meals, there was something human. Tenderness, invention, desperation, joy. So as the night settles around you and the soft hum of the past fades behind closed lids, remember this. Food was never just survival. It was hope. It was rebellion. It was love, disguised in broth. Now, close your eyes. Let the crackle of old ovens and the whisper of herbs carry you into quiet sleep. No more trenches. No more tallow. No more boiling something until the demons leave. Just you, breathing soft, and the stories tucked warmly beneath your ribs.